paraît que la garde de l'Aube est en pleine réformation. Ce sont des chasseurs de vampires maintenant.
Go!
This is the 2020 Chevy Corvette, and it is quite simply the hottest car of the year. I have never gotten so many requests to review any car ever as the new Corvette And today, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to start with a little background. The Corvette first came out in the 1950s, and it's been a constant in the American story ever since, right up there with baseball and barbecue. The last few Corvette models have been great, but they've generally been an evolution around a fairly similar theme with a fairly similar look. That changes now. The 2020 Chevy Corvette is the 8th generation model, hence the name C8, and it has a totally different everything, starting with the fact that the engine is in the back, or more accurately, in the middle behind the seats. The Corvette has had 70 years of engine in the front, but that's done now. The manual transmission is also done. The only way you can get the new 8th generation Corvette is with a dual clutch automatic transmission. Not that you'll be complaining, because the numbers are amazing. The new Corvette comes standard with a V8 that makes 490 horsepower and 465 pound-feet of torque. And that dual clutch automatic sends it from 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. That's a big deal, but here's an even bigger one. It starts under $60,000. Never before in the history of the automobile could you get a sports car with this level of performance and this level of power for this money. And today, you get to find out what else you get. Because today, I'm going to take you on a thorough tour of the new Corvette and show you all of the quirks and features of the most hotly anticipated car of the year. Or frankly, of any year since I started doing this. Then I'm going to get the new Corvette out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the C8 with the key, which is actually fairly standard. On the back, you have a Corvette logo, and then you have another Corvette logo sort of on the side. This one is just gray and cool looking. And then you flip it over, and that's where all of your buttons are. You have 6 in total, but the most interesting is the one in the middle, the circle. That would be the remote starter button. You lock the car, press that twice, and it turns on, ready to begin your Corvette experience. And next up, let's talk about what happens when you unlock the car. Some interesting things. The most notable is in the back. Press the unlock button and you can see the turn signals sort of sequentially flash to let you know that the car has acknowledged your unlock. Up front, you also have a similar thing happen. Press the unlock button, the turn signals flash, and then the running lights sort of gradually light up again to let you know that the car is acknowledging your presence. But before I get in the C8, I want to start by getting in the back. There are a few ways to do this. One, you press this little button on the key fob twice, as you can see, and then the back pops open and you can open it up. Or you can come around to the rear of the car. Above the license plate, you have a little rear popper. You press that and the back pops open and you can get in. There's also a button in the interior. So anyway, I'm going to open it up and then you access the rear compartment. Now, as you can see, there are a few interesting items with the rear compartment, starting, of course, with the engine, which is back here, probably the biggest news about the new Corvette. The engine has been moved to the middle for better weight distribution and basically a better sports car driving experience. But anyway, like I mentioned, the engine is a V8, 6.2 liters, and it comes standard with 490 horsepower and 465 pound-feet of torque. Or you can upgrade to the Z51 package, which this car has. It's a performance package that costs $5,000 and adds a few items, one of which is a performance exhaust. That gives you 5 additional horsepower and 5 more pound-feet, bringing your totals up to 495 horses and 470 pound-feet of torque. And the improvements with the Z51 package go beyond just the performance exhaust and a little bit more power. You also get better brakes for better stopping power, you get better suspension for sportier handling, you get better tires, summer performance tires on the Z51 cars like this one, as opposed to all-season tires on other Corvette models. You also get an improved cooling system, which will be helpful on the racetrack when you're doing lots of hot race laps. You get an electronic limited slip differential, which again will help with your steering and handling, and you have a couple of appearance upgrades. The Z51 cars get this front splitter, which gives them a more aggressive look up front, and the C8 with the Z51 gets this rear spoiler, which also enhances the more aggressive look of this car. Now, next up, another interesting item worth noting in this engine bay. This car has the engine appearance package, which gives you 2 interesting items. One is these LED lights above the engine, so they illuminate your engine engine and you can look at it and admire it. The engine appearance package also gets you this carbon fiber trim around the engine, which just makes the whole thing look a little bit nicer, a little bit sportier, a little bit better. Now, the other item worth noting back here is that in addition to the engine compartment, this area is also a trunk. As you can see, you open up this rear hatch and you have both contained in one area. Of course, the trunk very separate from the engine to prevent heat problems, but you can get a pretty fair amount of stuff in this trunk. It's surprisingly large, relatively practical, and it's designed to carry the roof. All of the Corvette coupe models actually have a removable Targa top, and it's designed to fit back here in the trunk, no problem. Let me show you what I mean. To start the roof removal process, you first have to unlatch it. I'm going to start by unlatching the front latches. You can see very easy to do, just kind of pull them back, and then you move on to the rear latch. This one's a little bit more tricky, but it's still very simple, very easy process to unlatch the top. And from there, once you've unlatched the roof from the inside, it's pretty easy to take it out. Just kind of lift it out of the pins in the back, and it's surprisingly light. You can just lift it up and walk away, and suddenly your Targa roof is off. And from here, you're holding the roof. You want to put it in the trunk. You just bring it around back here. Again, it's pretty light, and it goes into some guides along the bottom. From there, you just push it down, and it latches into place, and then you're good to go. You can close your trunk, your roof is with you, and you can drive around in your open top configuration. Pretty easy. And next up, I want to show you the other interesting items with this rear compartment. One is how you close it. There's a little handle built into the underside of the rear compartment, so you can stick your hand in there. You do so, and then you can just easily pull it closed. The other cool thing is that you don't have to slam the rear compartment to close it because it has a soft close feature. Basically what that means is you can just bring the rear compartment down gently to a position where it seems like it's almost closed, and then the car will electronically do the rest. Take another look at that. It just automatically latches itself, so you don't have to slam it down like you might think you would. That is a pretty cool feature. And next up, we move on to the other trunk, because this car has two. There's one in back, like I just showed you, and there's one up front, because moving the engine out of here gives you more space, and you can use this as a cargo compartment. Now, getting into the front trunk has an interesting quirk. There's a couple of normal ways to do it. There's a button in the interior that'll pop it open, or you can tap this button on the key fob twice, and that will pop it open too, pretty standard. But my favorite way to enter the front trunk is through the hidden trunk popper in the front end of the car. It's just below the headlight on the driver's side. You reach around under here, and you can feel the little rubber trunk popper. You press it, and as long as the car is unlocked, the trunk will pop right open, and then you can get inside. Take another look, it's right under here, and it pops the trunk right open. Now, when you're in the trunk, or rather I should say the front trunk, since there are two, there are a few interesting quirks worth noting. One is the size. This is a fairly reasonable size and a good complement to the rear trunk. It's more cargo space than you typically get in a mid-engine sports car like this. Another interesting item in the front trunk is the emergency inside trunk release required by the government in case someone tries to kidnap you with their C8. You press this button so you can get out, and I just love the diagram on this button. It shows this scared person with his arms flailing jumping out of the front trunk of the C8. At least it very clearly illustrates its purpose. But maybe my favorite thing with the C8 trunk is the way that the trunk lid is designed in the front. You have this sort of jagged edge front end. It almost looks like a puzzle piece how it fits into the bodywork. I love this look. They could have just made it smooth and simple, but instead it almost looks like it has aggressive, angry teeth, even though this is just the trunk lid edge design. It's pretty cool. And since we're on the outside of this car and talking about the look, let's just do it. Let's discuss the styling of the new Corvette. I love it. I do think there's one major drawback, which is that the front end design appears a little too visually high compared to the rear and compared to the look of this car. It's almost like the front end is just a little too ungainly and not quite perfect, but otherwise, I love the look of this car. It stands out, it looks far more exotic, far more expensive than it is, and I think they did a really great job. I don't consider it to be really beautiful, but it is a standout, it makes a statement, and it's really cool. Probably my favorite Corvette design since the C2 in the 1960s, which is truly one of the most beautiful cars ever made. And to me, it's a big welcome improvement over the C5, the C6, and the C7, which frankly always just kind of looked like evolutions on the same basic design. We were ready for a big change for a Corvette, and we got one. And next up, let's talk about a few design Easter eggs on the outside of this car. One is on this rear window. You have this kind of fading black piece around the edge of the window. But if you look closely, you can see that the items that are kind of fading are actually little Corvette logos that are all going down the window. I showed you this on the C7 Corvette as well, but the C8 keeps it, and it's a nice little thing. Most people won't notice, but some will, especially if they've seen this video. And next up, if you're like me, you're probably wondering where exactly would a front license plate go? Because most of North America and all of the rest of the world requires a front license plate. Apparently you just pop off this little compartment that says Corvette in the front, pull that off, and then there's a bracket that you can mount on here to put the license plate on. But obviously this car is gonna look a lot better with no front license plate. It's really gonna screw up kind of the visual front styling and design of this car where everything comes to a point. But obviously in some places you have to do it, so that's how you would. And next up, here's another interesting quirk. You can sort of see from your angle, the posts for the mirrors are different lengths. On the driver's side, you can see the mirror post, okay, fine. You go over to the passenger side and the mirror post is actually longer. This is a visibility issue, apparently. If the posts were the same size, then over on the passenger side, the mirror would be too close to the car and the A-pillar could block the driver's line of sight to the mirror. So they stick it out a little bit further, and that's how you get to unequal length mirror posts, something you don't really notice unless you look very closely. And next up, another interesting exterior item with this car is the lighting, especially in back. There's a couple of interesting items. One is the turn signal. This car has a progressive turn signal, which has become popular in modern vehicles. You can see it turns on and then it gets progressively smaller, which is the opposite of most cars where the signal starts small and gets progressively larger, which is how it is on the Ford Mustang, probably the most common car to use this feature. One other interesting rear lighting item is the brake lights. When I press the brake lights, you can see it's not the whole tail light assembly back here that lights up, but instead just these little lights on the edges. And you notice that was also the turn signal. You put on the turn signal and one of the brake lights goes away to become the turn signal. This is still allowed under US tail light regulations. The interesting thing here is you have all this brake light tail light to work with that could light up for the brake lights, but it doesn't. Instead, it's confined to that little area and it shares the lighting with the turn signal. Something I didn't realize until I started playing around with this car. And finally, our last interesting item on the outside of the Corvette is the cameras. In the front, you have a couple of cameras to give you a front camera view, which is becoming more and more common in more and more new cars. And in back, you have a camera you can see mounted above the license plate to give you the rear camera view, which is now mandated here in the United States. The interesting camera, though, is on the top. You can see in the middle, right next to the rear window, there's a camera back there. So what exactly is that for? I'm going to show you in a second. To do that, we move inside the new Corvette where it's dry and warm. And I turn your attention to the rear view mirror because it isn't a mirror at all. Well, actually now it's a mirror, but if you flip this switch, it becomes a camera display. And of course, the camera that feeds to that display is the one that's mounted on the rear of the car, and that's why it's placed there. And the benefit of this mirror camera is obvious. Instead of having a mirror where you're just looking behind you and you can see seats and bodywork and it obstructs your vision, the camera, your vision isn't obstructed at all. It's a really cool feature. And one of the coolest things about the mirror camera is its adjustability. For one thing, you can change the brightness in case you want it to be a little bit brighter, a little bit dimmer, whatever you decide. You can also zoom in case you just want to see more or closer or less. You can pick exactly where the camera is displaying. And you can tilt it just like a mirror. You can move it up or down depending on your seating position, where you are in the seat, exactly what you want to see. It's a pretty nifty little trick. And next up, we move on to probably this car's most controversial interior item, and that would be the center control stack. You can see there's like a giant line of buttons and switches going down the middle. I counted 20 different adjustments here between all of the buttons and the switches, and they're all just kind of arranged in this one single line in the center rather than in your usual center control stack arrangement, basically every other car. So let me walk you through this line of buttons. At the very top, you have the controls for the driver's side of things. So this switch on the top adjusts the climate control temperature on the driver's